Let's say a big bird and an insignificant egg walk into a bar. The egg cracks and the bird gets survivor's guilt so strong he invented a new dazzling way to panic. How about we talk about that? Now that Kanto 9 is over and the drip feed of named character IDs are pouring in again, we've got 2 characters from Part 3 that mechanically are some of my favorites in the game. So if you pull based on vibes, collected, or the amount of lust this haircut can generate, well, you already know whether or not you should get these suckers. For everyone else though, here's the TLDR. Sinclair plays nice with the poise and pride resin team that only wants one thing and one thing only: more than 20 potency and major crit damage. Sure, he can go on a bleed team, but signs say that he's only marginally more helpful than a Hemobar or She-Faust. And I'm only mentioning her because it's her birthday. Meanwhile, Gregor here plays like hot sauce. Sure, he'll burn ya, maybe make you cry, but he goes great on nearly anything. Whether you like burn sinking, or making a team with the Ego Gear users, or just want an ID that plays well with low speed and some sync and panic type comps, especially Heisho Dawn, he gets along with a lot of folks. Once again, happy birthday Faust. But before we go staring at some bright lights, I'll give Pinky Boy his time in the sun. The House of Spiders Pinky Apprentice Sinclair is a poise bleed unit that leans significantly more into poise than bleed. And the reason for that is because his kit revolves around a status called Moonlit Azure Blade, just like his Kanto counterpart. Just like his inspiration, this buff will give Sinclair shield and crit damage based on the stack. And he builds it from his innate passive Singular Focus of the Mind, which will take any poise potency beyond a certain amount and convert some of it into this little scabbard stash. The passive also gives him SP and slash power up anytime he doesn't equip any attack skills. Keyword here being equip. So even if he doesn't use an attack, setting one up will still not apply the buff. And just from that alone, we already have an idea on what makes this man's tick. His special resource that helps him stay alive and deal more damage only comes into play after Sinclair reaches a certain threshold of poise. Now if I had to call out where that threshold is, it's probably either 20 or 25. 20 is the max amount of potency most units need since it guarantees crits, but Ren and Kanto 9 also use 25, so it's gonna come down to how much the character is adapted to the ID. And thankfully, unlike Ren, this Pinkman doesn't lose his sword when he's hit. He also doesn't do meth. All this means is that he's going to live or die based on how much poise he can generate. And I'm happy to say that literally every other on-field skill he has leads him to generating poise. For instance, our broken Boltcut here has a Sin Power passive in the Orthodox Blade, which gives him poise based on pride resin at combat start, and some extra poise count at combat end if he's got enough potency. This is why he'll play nicest on a pride team, since it's one of the easiest ways to get poise, even if he happens to be staggered. Next, his Clashable Guard, Defend, acts as the promising starter. It's the only skill of his that before use will generate him both poise P and C, and works with his innate passive to generate SP without using any offensive skills. And the reason I'm confident this is a starter is because it'll outright change itself to another skill once he gets enough poise under his belt. And besides, he'll probably get shield from his MAB after a while, so it's not like we need him to LARP as a third Zwei ID. Once he reaches that poise threshold though, he'll instead use his evade Swerve. And Swerve is the reason why you should never trust anything I say, because this evade will give him more shield based on his MAB stack, and give him more poise count plus crit damage up if he happens to use it and dodge an attack. The way I see it is that these two defense skills are a sign of what kind of playstyle the wannabe Star Child is leaning into. If he's got the shield, it's a sign he's still finding his footing. If he's got the evade, he's literally poised to attack. And that picture is gonna get all the clearer once we get to his attack skills. Falstar Slayer is Sinclair's Wrath skill 3 with but a single coin doing all of its heavy lifting. Based on the trailer, this move has the means to reach 3 attack weight, but will only do so with enough MAB. What's nice about it though is that if you happen to use it only on a single target, you're not really wasting it since the move will get a damage buff based on the excess attack weight. The skill itself gets more powerful based on the man's poise and MAB, and will do him the kindness of changing that 1 coin into a UB with enough of his funny blade. He'll get poise on use and deal more damage based on the number of targets as mentioned, as well as extra crit damage and another effect PM's had fun sprinkling into IDs lately. If he both crits and gets heads, he'll inflict a percentage of the coin's final damage as slash damage. And based on the other recent IDs that have this move, chances are this is gonna be 20% like with the Yohei show, or 30% like Kira Mail, since this is technically conditional and not guaranteed damage. Either way, this move's here to do 2 things and 2 things only: hurt people, and eat up his MAB once the job's done. He does also inflict some bleed on this, but I wouldn't consider this skill to be the main bleed focus. That honor goes to his skill 2. Nameless Fetus is an abnormality from Lobotomy Corporation known for upsetting people with high-pitched cries and causes damage to agents based on winning a random lottery. Similarly, Nameless Slash is a move owned by Sinclair that has the unfocused volley trait, which chooses its targets at random. Instead of coin power, it gains base power based on his poise, which is done for good reason. While the first coin only provides poise P and C on hit, the second coin can be reused up to twice. The first reuse happens if the coin crits, and the second happens if the reused coin hits heads, and the man's has enough MAB. That second coin that keeps getting reused also can deal more damage on crit, gives him poise count, and inflicts bleed, meaning he can apply 3 instances of bleed potency at once with this move. So yeah, even if I don't think he's the first fella you'd send bunkin' with Blood Fiends and Tomodachi Life, chances are he could get anywhere from 3 to 6 potency off this move, or maybe 9 if PM's feeling absurdly generous. Then we've got his skill 1, Chain Strike. This sucker is the only attack skill that gives Sinclair poise count on use and gives him more coin power based on poise. He'll also gain some bonus poise from his coin hits, gain haste on the next turn, with a bit extra if he crits, and funnily enough, inflict bleed count. Again, I don't consider this to be much of a bleed ID, especially considering bleed isn't even factored into him getting his buffs, but we can at least say he inflicts more bleed count than Middle Sinclair and can do it with a skill that appears half the time. Yay? And lastly, we have this lowly Stars support passive, Tranquility. The ally with the fastest speed heals SP and gets shield when they use a defensive skill. Considering this is a passive for fast IDs that like to use defensive skills, this could be a versatile way to protect either a Heisho or Sank ID when they need to ease up for a turn. It's not the flashiest tool, but I can see the value here. But if you're not a diehard Heisho user, then this fella is a better fit on than off the field. Phase 1 is to build a lot of poise. And I mean, he better be optimizing that shit like he's running Enfield, Factorio, Satisfactory, and an actual job all at once. And no matter what skills you use, he'll be better served by getting Pride Resonance every turn. So for the sake of example, here's a quick and dirty reference for different IDs that work generally well together at maintaining poise and Pride Res without stepping on each other's toes too much. Just imagine it's Renclair here instead of the basement baby. Aside from the resonance play though, the first couple of turns with Sinclair will come down to whether you can win a clash. If you can, by all means, use his offensive skills and get a serving of poise and SP. If you can't, then his guard will do the job without having to win at all. Keep on following that logic until you get him pretty high on both fronts, and then we'll move on to phase 2. By this point, we're good on Sinclair's poise and SP and can move on to cosplaying as Albina by feeding poise to our sword. So long as you can make sure Sinky doesn't use up all the poise count and you can keep his potency up, he'll be able to more easily go on the offensive. While you could be fine going ham and win rating with the idea in this phase without it being disastrous, if you feel like you're in a spot where you're at risk of losing your entire stack, you can always use Swerve to maintain it and get more count. But considering the 3 main ways he has to maintain it, you'll more likely use it if you really want to juice him up with the crit buff for phase 3. Once you're all set with a full stack of Moonlit as your blade, just throw out those skill 2 and 3s like there's no tomorrow. By this point, all that's important is that you should be ready to build up your MAB again after using the skill 3. However, the skill 2 is more powerful if you just have a lot of it, while the skill 3 costs a lot of it for it to reach max power. But either way, you can keep this up until your special Poise Tower of Babel needs repairs and sends you back to phase 2, or topples like a certain library and sends you back to phase 1. As always though, a vision's only as good as the reality it's built off of. So let's see what can ruin this one. Aside from the usual need for solid clash power in the range of 15, 20, and 25 for the respective offensive skills, there's a small detail we haven't really covered about this ID. Yeah, this is the first poise-focused ID we've gotten ever since the Backshot brothers. And not the ones from Season 6 either, no, I mean the Full Stop office. It's been a year. Like, I don't care if he technically does bleed. That's just volunteer work, since any other poise ID since last year has had to balance itself out with some other factor like sinking or rupture. So if the poise generation this man gets is not at least as good as Full Stop Hong Lu, well, we're gonna have some problems. The fact that he can get it from Pride Res and nearly every skill is a good sign though. All I'm saying is that unless he generates 1 poise per resin from that pinky orthodox church passive, we better be seeing mostly 3s and 5s when it comes to getting potency. Cause again, he lives or dies based on poise generation. But then we've got the more finicky ways this could fall apart. If his poise is capped at less than 20 and say 15 before it turns into Moonlit Azure Blade, then that means he'll have a hard time critting as often. Yes, the chances will still be near 100%, and since he only converts the poise at turn end, it's not impossible for him to get guaranteed crits, but it will add more uncertainty to any of his crit buffs that would otherwise not exist. And on that note, if his Moonlit Azure Blade stacks to anything higher than 20 or 25, that could become a problem too. While being able to hold more of his MAB isn't bad in a vacuum, Project Moon tends to design IDs to use their most powerful skills either by spending most or all of the ID's custom resource. So since a higher cap means needing to generate more poise to use the most powerful version of a skill, it means the ID will get stronger slower. Again though, I don't think 20 to 25 is out of the question or any issue for the DHUE wannabe. And lastly, I've got, like, nothing for this guy on Ego. Compared to the other centers, Sinclair's notorious for having a dollar store spread of ults, and none of them happen to work with poise. But if you twist my arm, Blubber Bubble on Cavernous Wailing could help with maintaining that shield. Overall though, I'm just interested to see how they manage a nearly pure poise unit in Season 7. But let's not kid ourselves here, Papa Roach is the main event. And he's easily the more complex ID on this banner. Lobotomy Ego Lamp Gregor is a burn sinking or bunking ID that plays a lot like his inspiration. While his build does give a fair share to both of the main statuses he applies, he mainly works by using his own custom statuses and panic type to make him slower and stronger and his enemies weaker. And that all starts with his main resource, Lamp. Now, usually I'd start by explaining the status itself, but it's gonna make more sense if we go over one of Gregor's passives first. For now, all you need to know is that you want Lamp. You want Lamp on this ID like you want Poise on Sinclair, Charge on a W Corp unit, or Lantern Knee Song in the ground. And one of the main ways he gets Lamp is through his innate passive, Dazzling Lamp. This passive is always active and will give him Lamp at turn start. This also gives him a few speed-related quirks that change the ID. This early bird that is the worm can't change his min and max speeds by effects other than his own, but he can always redirect enemy attacks to himself regardless of speed in focused encounters. And lastly, if any effect were to give him haste, he would instead gain Clash Power up. It'll only work once per turn, but when you put all that together, this is an ID that is built to be one of the slowest members of the party and the fight in general. Now with that in mind, let's see how Lamp works. This status gives Gregor Bind the following turn based on the stack, but if he has a max stack of Lamp by turn end, he'll consume it all to activate some effects. He'll give himself aggro on his leftmost slot and apply Dazzle to the core of the enemy with the greatest HP. And that is a status he's gonna make great use of. Dazzle is a negative status that has more effects than Kiramale has friends. Plenty more than 0. It'll make the target take more damage from any base attack skills based on its bunking, and Dazzle acts as its own panic type separately from that, meaning Sinking's next chapter really might be stacking several different panic types. Like all panic statuses, this one loses a stack every turn, can only stack up to however much is applied at the moment, and has a different effect depending on whether the enemy has a panic type that can be changed. For enemies that can change their panic type, they gain Bind and offense level down next turn, and those that can't or don't have SP at all will just lose defense level. As always, here are the regular conversions of offense and defense levels to power down and fragile. We'll be coming back to this status a lot, so keep in mind that having Dazzle on an enemy is a great thing, and we want to make Lamp so it can happen as often as possible. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's round out the statuses with a buff I imagine will come up in a later Walpurgis night. Guardians of the Forest is a buff that will apply a different effect to units based on whether they use a plus or a minus coin skill. Before the attack, plus coin users will heal SP and get some offense level up if they're already at the max, and minus coin users will lose SP to a minimum of probably 40, since that's the precedent recent minus coin IDs use to avoid panicking. Just make sure you pick your favorite skill before taking a bite out of this eyeball, because it can't stack and it goes away after its effect goes off. So expect any instance of this to be a one and done while you have it. And now that the fancy statuses are accounted for, let's round out those passives. Eyes Bright Like Lamps has a little something for all 3 of these statuses. This passive generates the lamp on the man with teal gloves based on the gloom resin and gives him extra SP if any enemy has Dazzle. Lastly, he'll apply Guardians of the Forest at the end of every turn to the ally in the earliest deployment order. The only rules are that the unit can't already have it, be in a panic state, or be Gregor himself. So long as Guardians does go away once the unit uses a move, like it appears to, this could allow Hogor to buff the same unit over and over if you set it up this way. It's almost like he's trying to act like a support, which is really cute considering his other passive. Ego Gear Proficiency Manual gives Gregor more defense level up based on however many allies are using Ego Gear. So if you needed another reason to use LCE Faust with him, there we are. And if you needed another reason for her to use her funny skill 4 on her birthday, Gregor will even gain pierce damage up the turn after an ally dies. See, this buff makes sense because it gives him an internal gloom resonance. Speaking of gloom, let's go on to his third and final means of getting lamp, his clashable guard. The Wick of Burnt Feathers is a gloom defensive skill that will allow Gregor to generate lamp up to a certain point at the cost of some HP depending on how much lamp he gets. As a bonus, this move also gives haste to allies based on how much bind he has on himself. Considering all those lamps are going to weigh him down, you'll probably have a good chunk of bind by the time this effect goes off at turn end. As far as its use case though, this feels more in line with Index Dawn's method of getting to her own unlock and ego faster. You'll get to speed up his scaling at the cost of his HP. Very cool, very healthy. And all of this starts to matter more when we look at Gregor's attack skills. Now, all three of these skills either gain coin or clash power if he meets one of the following three universal conditions. Those are if the target is faster than Gregor by a certain degree, if Gregor's speed is low enough period, or if the target has dazzle. This means that keeping the mans as slow as possible or applying dazzle as often as possible is the best way to get the most out of any of his offensive moves. And the best example of this comes from his skill 3. Salvation for Those Enchanted by the Lamp is a Pride Pierce skill that gains some coin power from the universal conditions and additional coin power based on bunking on the target, with the bonus of more clash power and turning the coins into UBs if the enemy has dazzle on them. The move itself will inflict bunking P and C, and the final coin has several procs for more damage if the core has low enough HP, has dazzle, and if they do have dazzle, they'll also take more gloom damage based on the coin's final value. Similar to other IDs, this can be anywhere from 20 to 30%. What's interesting about this skill though is that if the move kills an enemy or they have a certain stack of dazzle, Potentiality Man here will get an extra plus coin boost the next turn, which happens to mesh well with his skill 2. Destroy the Visible with the Invisible is a Gloom Pierce skill that gains clash power from the universal conditions and gets extra coin power from bunking on target. The coins themselves will collectively inflict bunking P and C, but come with some extra bonuses on the first two. Following the recent extra alternative damage trend, the first two coins will deal an extra percentage of the damage dealt to the enemy as blunt. So basically, just take a fraction of whatever you did to them and throw on some extra blunt damage like you hit him with a hammer. The values on this one aren't as clear cut as the other cases since those are all on skill 3s, but since this is guaranteed damage without a condition on a skill 2, I feel like this will likely be anywhere from 10 to 20% extra. And considering that this is a skill with 4 coins, it's a great one to use on the turn after getting the plus coin boost with the S3. And that brings us to the skill 1, Intense Stare, 0 range. The universal conditions can give this little stab coin power alongside bunking, and in addition to applying bunking potency, this gives Greg a bit of bind so that he has an easier time next turn meeting his conditions. Since playing with speed in this way is new territory for an ID, we can't be totally sure of how effective it'll be, but if Greg's range is going to be within Hohenheim's, which is anywhere from 1 to 4, getting 3 bind total with this in Lamp is a solid way to get him to a good shooting perch. Or if he's just waiting in the wings while everyone else fights, he can instead apply his support passive, Were There More Lives to Be Saved? God, I love how these guys never let up. This baby is better for any blunt units that can take a beating since it applies both aggro and blunt damage up, kinda like him chucking that invisible hammer again after every hit. Some could call this a Sunshower Heathcliff synergy, yes, but I like to think it's a backdoor way to get on the middle's good side. Regardless, it's not every day that the LCE gets to see action like this, so it may as well get him a vision board to make it count. And on that board, the first phase is all about resources, Lamp for his plays and SP for general use. While Gregor doesn't rely on Lamp as much as Sinclair relies on Poise, setting him up well enough to get some consistent bind for his universal conditions early is a good call. This can either be done by spending some of his HP on using his defensive skill, or if you have a sinking team, some Gloom Resonance. It's unclear yet if this will take more than 1 turn, but I doubt you'll need to go out of your way much more than that. For a quick and dirty reference, Here's an example team that balances the burn, sinking, and a bit of the ego gear side of things. When opening up the details, this team can force at least 3 Gloom Res with the starting lineup, with a total of 5 possible with base skills. Of course, this is a team meant to showcase different strategies on IDs that are focused on supporting him specifically, so for something more geared towards sinking, gloom, or burn, you'll want to replace the IDs accordingly. He can also set up a unit on slot 2 like Don Sinclair, or if you're not like me and have her, indexed on Quixote, to have an easier time getting them to manifest ego quicker with Guardians of the Forest. But either way, once the SP is up and the lamp is lit enough to get Greg some bind, the man that stole Heathcliff's haircut here can move on to phase 2. This is the part where Dazzle, the skill 2, and his skill 3 come into play. Once you're at a state where you know Dazzle will apply on the next turn, you can either try to save for the skill 3 since that'll be when it's most useful, or try to control who gets Dazzle since that will only affect the enemy with the highest HP. That said, since Greg is gonna have his universal conditions once he has enough bind, you're usually safe to win rate once you get to this part. However, if you're willing to tee this up, you can jump into phase 3 to make the most of the opportunity. If you've got a skill 3 on deck while an enemy is near death, or a target with some freshly squeezed Dazzle to play with, you can run that skill and then meet either condition to give Gregor plus coin boost next turn. Now, you could use it on the skill too, that is your business and a perfectly fine move. But if you happen to curate Walpurgis Night Ego and have Solemn Lament on deck, you can sick that fluttering puppy onto your object of obsession to get a whopping extra 8 coin power. And considering the ego passive and the fact that this can apply a coffin full of sinking, it's a perfect choice for the man that can't stop thinking about dead flying things, even if he needs a little help fueling it. But now that we've finished entertaining the idea, let's see how this entire thing could fall apart. There's the obligatory clash value and status application mention, though even some lesser potency or count won't make us put him on sick leave. Since Gregor's main mechanic revolves around his speed manipulation, he can get some buffs even if the application is lackluster. What would mess him up though, is a speed range that is higher than 4 and ideally hovers around 2 to 3. While having Dazzle on the enemy is ideal, the most consistent way Gregor stays powerful is by keeping himself slow. So if we say his minimum speed is 3, he'll need 2 bind to get all the way down to 1, and if it's 4, he'll need 3 bind, and so on. Now, this is assuming that Gregor needs to get all the way down to 1 speed to proc his universal condition, since that's what Hohenheim did in Kanto 9. To put it another way, if getting bind from Lamp and his skill 1s aren't enough to guarantee he's slow enough, he's gonna have a rougher time. The same can be said for his Lamp generation and the Dazzle stack. Nearly every panic type is applied with a stack of 3, meaning it lasts the current turn and 2 more after that. But that's not always the case. So if Dazzle comes in with a stack of 2, that means Gregor's best buffs last for only 1 effective turn, making him less reliable. Alternatively, if Lamp takes more than 3 to 4 turns of offensive use to generate Dazzle, that means that even if Dazzle is applied in 3s, he's gonna have a hard time maintaining that and getting that plus coin boost from his skill 3. So if Lamp has a cap of 20, like with Hohenheim, but only generates like 4 or 5 per turn, that's just as rough as Dazzle only getting 2 stacks, since that's fewer turns total it can be up. Overall, Greg having 1 or 2 of these qualities won't ruin the ID, but it's worth watching out to see if he gets half or more on release, since that could ruin the vision. And then lastly, Stubbles likes his sinking ego and has no burn ego to speak of. So Bygone Days and Solemn Lament, or Christmas Nightmare if you need to wait for Walp, can do the job. And then you can fill in the gaps on the Zayn and Vav sections as you see fit. Just don't expect this ID to fuel any of them without help. He's not built to live alone after all. And that's all I got for you. Let me know if you like this idea of throwing teams together as examples, because I'm not sure if I can do it with every ID as they come out, since collecting them isn't really a high priority beyond not missing a season. But hey, if it can be a helpful reference and I got the IDs, all for the better. Oh, and if you're seeing this after the release, what hit the mark and what went wrong? I like taking every drop release as a way to improve the process a little bit. And to cap things off, let's hit up the member and patron Q&A. All right, today's Q&A comes from Adelphos Kerr, and they have a question that we suddenly have a much easier answer for. Would Blood Fiends be able to use Efflorescent Ego since they're not quite distortions as explained in DD, or would it just be an extension of their powers over Blood and Desires? So if I got around to this one like a month or 2 ago, I probably would have told you anywhere from we can't really know to no, because it seems like even if they're not distortions, Blood Fiends interact with the light in some way because Dante sees them as almost distortions. But that would have been totally wrong because index device Don Quixote clearly effloresces an ego. So apparently, yeah, Blood Fiends can get in on all of this. Ego, distortions, Shin and Mong even. Now if Don can just start Hemaholics Anonymous and get them to kick their drinking problem, well, they'd be pretty well off.